All right, folks, the NFL quarterback carousel is finally starting to take shape, and with Russell Wilson heading to the Giants, things just got real interesting for the Atlanta Falcons. This is exactly what Terry Fontenot and the Falcons were banking on when they held on to Kirk Cousins, even after paying him that $10 million roster bonus. And guess what? That gamble might just pay off. Let's break it down. There are 3 legit QB vacancies left: the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Browns, and Tennessee Titans. But here's the thing. There are only 2 real quarterbacks available: Aaron Rodgers, who I fully expect to land in Pittsburgh, and Cam Ward, a top draft prospect that Tennessee is likely to take with the first overall pick. That means one team is going to be left desperate for a quarterback. And that team? The Cleveland Browns. Now, this is the part the Falcons were hoping for. They knew that between the Giants, Steelers, Browns, and Titans, someone would end up without a dance partner. And when that happens, Atlanta's phone is going to ring. And on the other end, it just might be the Cleveland Browns asking about Kirk Cousins. Look, I know we're all tired of talking about Kirk, and trust me, I get it. But this is the reality. The dude is still one of the biggest names on the trade market. With Russ going to New York, we are one step closer to finally figuring out his future. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm not officially calling Kirk Cousins a Cleveland Brown yet, but man, we're getting close. The biggest holdup? Kirk's no-trade clause. According to Albert Breer, one of the key factors in any deal is that Cousins doesn't want to end up in the same situation as last year, getting traded to a team that immediately drafts his replacement. So what's his move? He could wait until after the draft, see which teams pass on a rookie QB, and then agree to a trade. That way, he knows he's going somewhere that actually wants him as the starter. So here's the deal. Terry Fontenot and the Falcons took a $10 million gamble on this. If they play their cards right, they could flip Kirk for some serious value. And if a team like Cleveland does make a move, they'll probably work out a deal to offset some of that salary. Bottom line, we're getting closer to the Kirk Cousins saga finally coming to an end. Buckle up, Falcons fans. It's about to get real interesting. Let's talk about Kirk Cousins' contract for a second. The Falcons aren't going to pay his full $37.5 million salary, and frankly, no team trading for him will either. There's going to be some salary split between Atlanta and the team that takes him on. Now, we've been discussing the possibility of a trade, but what could the Falcons get in return? Josina Anderson threw out the idea of a third-round pick, but honestly, I don't see that happening. That's a little too optimistic if you ask me. Realistically, I think we're looking at something more in line with what we saw with the Calvin Ridley trade. Here's how I see it. Kirk Cousins could go to the Browns for a 5th-round pick. But here's the kicker. If he plays 50% of the snaps and Cleveland makes the playoffs, that 5th could jump to a 4th-rounder. If the Browns re-sign him after that, it could go up to a 3rd-round pick. So there's some conditional value built in, and this kind of structure is what I expect for Cousins, not a straight-up 3rd-rounder. Now, if Terry Fontenot somehow manages to pull a 3rd-round pick straight up for Kirk, that's like hitting the jackpot. But let's be honest, no one's playing that tune right now. Now, if no team calls for Kirk Cousins, that's when things get sticky. It's going to be a $10 million nightmare for Terry Fontenot and the Falcons. I'll explain why in a second, but first, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think the Falcons should trade Kirk Cousins? Personally, I believe they should pull the trigger, and it's not just about draft capital or financial reasons. From a human element, I think it's about having a solid backup for Desmond Ridder, someone who is invested in the role and not just pissed off about being the backup. Kirk Cousins came to Atlanta with the idea of being the starter, and now he's going to be sitting behind a young QB who might be taking his spot. Not exactly ideal, right? Cousins might not be the best attitude guy to mentor a young QB. If the Falcons do keep him, it's like having a backup who's just waiting for the season to be over, not exactly the kind of energy you want in the locker room. The real nightmare for Atlanta, though, is if no one calls for Kirk Cousins. That's a $10 million problem. It's not catastrophic, but it's still a big issue. This situation is honestly like that nightmare when you didn't study for an exam, walk into class, and realize you have a test that day. Or even worse, it's like my personal nightmare from 2020, where I skipped an entire semester of class and then showed up on finals day, completely unprepared. I'm sure you can imagine the panic. No one wants that. If no team calls for Kirk Cousins and by August, the Falcons find themselves in a situation where no one wants him and they're stuck with him as the backup, that's a problem. Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, might not be thrilled about forking out $10 million for a guy who's essentially sitting there doing nothing. This is when the Falcons have to make a decision. Either release him and eat that $10 million, or figure out what to do with him and avoid another awkward situation. I mean, that's a nightmare scenario for Atlanta. Now, before we switch gears and talk about Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot attending the Ohio State Pro Day together, which we'll get into in a second, I've got to quickly mention our friends at Prize Picks. They've got an awesome deal for Falcons fans. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks makes daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. You pick more or less on a few players, and boom, you could win up to 1,000 times your money. As basketball season heats up, Prize Picks is your go-to place for real money action while watching your favorite sports. Download the app today and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's a pretty sweet deal. Now back to football. Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris took a little trip to Columbus, Ohio for the Ohio State Pro Day. Now you could say that's just part of the job, and yeah, that's not wrong, but I think there's a bit more to it. They were one of only 3 teams to send both their head coach and GM to the event. The Bears and Steelers were the other teams. Out of the entire league, only 6 head coaches and 6 GMs made the trip. Last year, we saw these two fly out together to the Pacific Northwest to watch Michael Penix Jr., and we all know how that ended up. So this could be a big deal for the Falcons. What happens next? We'll just have to wait and see. All right, let's dive into the Ohio State Pro Day and see who the Falcons could be keeping an eye on. Now, I'm not expecting them to be there scouting the offensive line. Could I be wrong? Sure, maybe they're looking for a new blindside tackle for Michael Penix, but let's set aside guys like Josh Simmons and Donovan Jackson for now. And the running backs? I don't think they're after Mecca Bua either. If Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris are heading there together, I don't see it as a move for a day 3 guy like Will Howard or Denzel Burke. So who does that leave us with? 3 names: Jack Sawyer, Ty Williams, and JT Tuimoloau. Let's break it down. First up, Jack Sawyer. This guy was a huge recruit coming out of high school, like a lot of the players at Ohio State. He's got a motor that just won't stop. His effort is second to none. The power, the brute strength, it's all there. We saw it during Ohio State's national championship run, and he really made his presence felt in the college football playoff. But let's be real. For someone with the hype he had, his production didn't exactly blow people away. Still, he's a team captain and was a game changer on the field, especially in the playoff. Remember that strip sack on Quinn Ewers? That pretty much sealed Ohio State's win in that game. Here's the deal with Sawyer. He's not going to be a superstar, but he's going to be a solid defensive end in the NFL. He's probably a round 2, maybe round 3 guy, and if you're looking for someone with raw power and a ton of effort, even if he's not the fastest or most agile, he's your guy. He'll win with strength and hustle, and that's going to make him a fan favorite wherever he lands. Now let's talk about JT Tuimoloau, another big-time recruit who came in as the Polynesian Player of the Year out of high school. This guy had a breakout season with 12.5 sacks, which is impressive. He's a bit of a late bloomer, though, especially for a guy who came in with all that hype. He played all 4 years at Ohio State, but similar to Sawyer, he's not exactly an elite athlete, which is why I don't think he'll go in round 1. but I still see him as more of a round 2 guy, and honestly, he could go a little higher than Sawyer because of his production this past season. He was dominant in the college football playoff with 3 pass breakups and 2 forced fumbles. If you're looking for someone with a higher upside compared to Sawyer, I'd say JT Tuimoloau might be that guy. So when it comes down to it, Sawyer brings the effort and the strength, while Tuimoloau might have a little more upside with his production and potential. Either way, these are 2 solid defensive players who could be looking to make an impact in the NFL. I'm not going to say JT Tuimoloau is a way better athlete than Jack Sawyer, but some scouts might give the slight edge to JT when it comes to speed. I don't want to make it sound like JT's flying around the field like he's some kind of Olympic sprinter, because honestly they're not that far apart in terms of athleticism, but I'll give the nod to Tuimoloau for being a slightly better athlete overall. However, Sawyer probably has him beat in the strength department. So really, these 2 are in the same ballpark, just a little different in what they bring to the table. Now let's talk about Ty Williams. This guy's story is a bit different. Unfortunately, he went down during his 40-yard dash at the Ohio State Pro Day, which is just rough luck. He's a nose tackle who came into Ohio State tipping the scales at 360 pounds, way too heavy to be effective. But credit to him, he worked to get that weight down to around 320 pounds, and at the combine, he checked in at 334 pounds. Now, this is where things get interesting. Could Atlanta be looking at him as a potential replacement for Grady Jarrett? I don't think so. Not exactly. Williams doesn't have that same pass-rushing upside that Grady had. This is more of a run-stuffer type, someone like Onyemata or Eddie Goldman, even though Onyemata is still on the team. But he's a deep interior defensive lineman who, when he's on his game, can be one of the top defensive tackles in this draft. The problem is, inconsistency is a real issue. When he's off, he doesn't even look like a round 2 pick. So, there's some boom or bust potential with him. So, of the 3 players we're looking at here, who might the Falcons be watching the closest? It's probably all 3 of them, but if I had to pick just one, I'd go with JT Tuimoloau. The guy put up 12.5 sacks this season, and I can totally see the Falcons being like, hey, if we plan to double dip at edge, this could be our guy in round 2. I'd be pretty surprised if any of these guys get picked at 15, though I wouldn't rule it out. But maybe the Falcons are thinking about trading back in the first round, targeting a guy around pick 25, and then grabbing someone like Tuimoloau. Or maybe they already know who they're taking in the first round, Michael Williams, James Pierce, or Mike Green, and they're just trying to shore up the defensive line with a new interior guy. That would be interesting, especially after they already took Rook in round 2 last year. Not that it's impossible to go back to the interior defensive line well, but after picking up so many guys like Rook, Brandon Dorrells, and Zion Logue, it seems a little excessive to spend another high pick there. It'd probably make more sense to go for an edge rusher or even cornerback. But hey, more is more when it comes to the Falcons' defensive line, right? Now, before we wrap up, here's a fun idea. Shout out your college in the comments. We all know where I went, and a lot of you love to hate on that, but that's the fun part. So let me know. Where did you go to school? What team do you watch on Saturdays? Drop it in the comments below.